I didn't think a pizza delivery on a rainy night would mark the beginning of the biggest shift in my life, but standing in front of that mansion, soaked head to toe beneath a blazing chandelier being laughed at just for doing my job, I realized it was time to step out of the strong older sister role my family had cast me in for over 20 years. My name is Sadie Quinn. I'm 24 years old, living in Spokane, Washington. I work as a barista every morning, starting at 5 a.m., then deliver pizzas until nearly midnight. As the oldest of three kids, I've always been the responsible one, meaning the one responsible for everyone else. If you've ever had to choose between your self-worth and family obligation, leave a comment, share this story, and follow the channel, because the road ahead isn't easy, but it's real. Rain had started just after dusk, the kind that falls in a steady mist, cold enough to sneak past your collar, relentless enough to soak through your coat. I'd finished 3 deliveries and was headed to the last one, a house in Westwood Heights, where every home had a private lawn, a stone-paved walkway, and wrought iron fences in faux Italian style. I parked, my windshield wipers dragging sluggishly across smeared glass. On the passenger seat sat 3 pizza boxes, a bag of wings, and a soda labeled M. Geller. I grabbed my umbrella, opened the door, and immediately got slapped in the face by wind as sharp as ice. Walking up the slick stone steps, I kept thinking about the morning shift at the cafe, where the espresso machine jammed and a customer yelled because 10 minutes for a latte is ridiculous. My hands still ached from scrubbing mugs and floors since 4:30 a.m. And now I was here, dripping wet, delivering food to a party I'd never be invited to but was expected to serve. The door opened. A guy in a hoodie and backwards cap looked at me and burst out laughing. "Pizza Girl's here," he shouted, and a few more laughs echoed from inside. $73.50, I said, keeping my voice even. He fished out $80 and tossed the bills into my hand. "Keep the change," he slurred, beer on his breath. I nodded and turned, ignoring the mix of pity and smugness in the glances from inside. By the time I got back to the car, my cap couldn't shield me from the sideways rain, and my hands were numb. "Sadie Quinn?" I spun around. A tall man stood under a black umbrella beneath a tree. Streetlight hit his face. A familiar one I hadn't seen in 8 years. "It's me, Uncle Grant." I don't remember what I said. Maybe, "What are you doing here?" or "I'm working." But I remember exactly how it felt. The cling of my damp Gino's Pizza uniform, the cold slipping under my clothes, and the surreal moment when the uncle who vanished from my life stepped forward and held the umbrella over me like he'd never left. We ended the night at a 24-hour diner where I finally got to sit somewhere dry, a hot cocoa cupped in my hands. I told him everything, from missing a scholarship because my college fund was borrowed, to open my brother's boxing gym, to working 2 jobs to pay off student loans, to feeling invisible every time I came home and heard my parents rave about that promising boy. Uncle Grant listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't pity me. His eyes were sad, but his posture steady. "Remember back in 4th grade when you drew that Protect the Forest poster?" I laughed. "I used up all my green markers." "I still have a copy of that in my office," he said, pulling out a business card. "My company, Haven Design, is looking for interns. Not because you're my niece, because I think your design eye is still there, just buried under bills and burnout." I twirled the card between my fingers. My stomach tightened, part nerves, part something unfamiliar. Hope. I didn't expect that to be just the beginning. I spent the next morning thinking about that business card. It sat neatly on my kitchen counter next to the hot sauce and nearly finished roll of paper towels. My 1-bedroom apartment had a leaky faucet and the constant scent of burnt toast from the neighbor's unit. But at least it was quiet. I stared at the card, white with silver trim, Haven Design, and Grant Quinn beneath. My hands were still marked red from gripping a freezing steering wheel in the rain. I tapped the paper gently as if I could read his true intentions from the ink. I replayed our diner conversation. "I don't want people thinking I got in because of family." "Then prove you didn't." I hadn't answered then, but my eyes met his, and it wasn't pity. It wasn't pressure. It was recognition, like he still saw the girl who colored every leaf on her poster with care and believed she was still in there, just hidden beneath exhaustion. My stomach growled. I toasted the last 2 slices of bread, spread peanut butter, and ate standing by the sink to save time. The cafe's early shift didn't allow for slow mornings. You look like you're contemplating a one-way trip to Mars, Zoe said when I stepped through the back door of Bean and Birch. I hung up my coat, damp hair clinging to my cheeks. Depends, if Mars has hot tubs. Zoe chuckled and handed me a towel. Only us till 10 today. Jason's sick, so you've got the register. I nodded. I didn't mind. Busy hands meant a quieter mind. Mid-shift, while wiping down the pastry case, Zoe looked at me through the glass. You okay? You're different today. I paused, then finally said, I ran into my uncle last night. Haven't seen him in almost 10 years. Your uncle, while delivering pizza? Right at the door of some mansion full of bad tippers. Now he wants me to apply for an internship at his design firm. She raised an eyebrow. Do you want to? I didn't answer immediately. I looked down at my hands, cracked knuckles from hot water, and let out a breath. I'm scared I'm not good enough, scared to be rejected, but also scared I'll just keep doing these same 2 jobs forever. Zoe was quiet, then rested her hand on my shoulder. If this were old you, I'd say, just do it. But this version of you, I'd say, do it, because you deserve the chance. I laughed. That sounds like something you'd print on a detox water bottle. She shrugged. On the house, no receipt. I smiled, but something inside me shifted. That afternoon I walked slower under the pale winter sun, my fingers still warm from the last mocha I made. The business card was still in my wallet, next to my transit pass and spare key. I stopped in front of a small print shop on the corner, stared at its faded sign. After 2 minutes of hesitation, I stepped inside. I need to print a portfolio, I said to the girl behind the counter. Full color, thick paper, and if possible, I need it within 24 hours. That night, I dug through my old hard drive. Half-finished design drafts, logo samples for bakeries, websites for hair salons, things I'd done for free or in exchange for goods. Maybe they weren't award-winning, but they were mine. Every line, every color palette, every late-night revision. When the clock hit 2 a.m., I sank to the floor, back against the wall, draft spread out in front of me. Outside the window, a light snow began to fall. I hadn't called Uncle Grant yet, but the next morning I put on a rarely worn gray turtleneck sweater, tied my hair back neatly, and packed my printed portfolio in a plastic folder. I wasn't sure what would happen, but maybe the first thing that needed to change was how I saw myself, not just someone built to survive night shifts. Then my phone buzzed. An unknown number. This is Claire from Haven Design. We received your email. Can you come in for an interview Tuesday morning? I looked up. The Tuesday square on my paper calendar was still blank. I pressed my lips together and nodded, though no one was watching. I didn't know how it would turn out, but I knew this much: I wasn't standing still anymore. The interview happened on a December morning. The sun was out, but it wasn't strong enough to melt the thin frost on my car's windshield. I drove slowly, gripping the steering wheel with damp palms, even though the heater hadn't warmed up yet. Beside me was my portfolio, carefully wrapped in plastic and tucked into a beige canvas tote Zoe had ironed for me the night before. The Haven Design building stood in the new downtown district, glass and steel, sleek in a deliberately modest way. I arrived 15 minutes early, checked my reflection in the lobby restroom mirror, and tried smiling to see if I looked desperate. I did, but at least my lips weren't cracked. Claire, Uncle Grant's assistant, greeted me in the lobby. She brought me to the 9th floor, where the main design office sprawled out in an open-plan space with white brick walls, polished concrete floors, and plants bigger than the desks. Jessica's waiting in meeting room 3, Claire said, pointing to a glass door at the end of the hallway. I nodded, throat dry. When I pushed open the door, Jessica was already seated, looking at something on her tablet. She looked up, her gaze direct, firm, but not cold. Sadie Quinn, she said, like confirming a name. Take a seat. I sat across from her, sitting too straight, my hands rested on my knees, but I could feel myself clutching the portfolio case tightly. Jessica wore a black turtleneck sweater, her chin-length hair perfectly straight, like even her strands were under control. She flipped through the pages of my portfolio, saying nothing for 2 long minutes. Those 2 minutes felt longer than an entire night shift. This one, she said, pausing on the third page. Is this a real project or a mock-up? It's for a small bakery in my neighborhood. They couldn't afford a designer, so I did it, in exchange for bread. For bread? Jessica looked up. Yes, and cookies, I said, smiling a little. But I had full creative freedom, colors, visual direction, everything. She nodded, flipping to the next page. What software did you use? Mostly Illustrator and Figma, Photoshop when I need to retouch photos, but I lean toward branding and UI design. But alignment, she said shortly. Typography needs more consistency. But your color choices have feeling. You've got taste. No one in the industry had ever said I had taste. I didn't say anything, just felt my toes curl inside my flats in rhythm with my heartbeat. The conversation lasted longer than I expected. Jessica wasn't easy, but she asked sharp, purposeful questions, as if testing whether I could defend my choices. I explained every rounded edge, every decision to leave white space, every time I picked a sans servant font for friendliness. She didn't smile, but I caught a tilt of her head at one of the poster pages. I guessed that was a good sign. When we finished, she closed the portfolio and said, "We offer a paid 3-month internship. Real projects, real teams. No coffee runs or copy machine duty." I swallowed. Can I take it? Jessica looked at me for a moment, then nodded. Next Monday, 9 a.m., business casual. Claire will email you the details. I stood up and thanked her, my voice hoarse from a tight throat all morning. As I stepped out, I spotted Uncle Grant heading toward the elevator. He looked at me and raised an eyebrow. No questions, no interference. I just nodded slightly, and he smiled. Just enough for me to understand. He believed in me. Now, it was my turn to believe in myself. That evening, I called the pizza shop. "I'm quitting," I said, with more certainty than I thought I had. "Really?" the manager asked. "Sadie, are you sure?" I need to let go of something to make room for something new. I didn't know where that line came from, but he paused and said, "Then grab that shot. And if you're ever tired, call me." I left the kitchen earlier than usual and walked past Zoe's building. Her lights were on. I knocked twice. She opened the door, holding a cup of instant noodles. "That smile tells me there's good news," she said. I nodded. "Internship starts Monday." She threw her chopsticks on the table and opened her arms. "Come here, give me a hug." We hugged like two high school friends who just made it into the drama club. And in that brief moment, I felt something lift. By the time I got home, a thin layer of snow had settled on the porch railing. I sat by the window with a cup of peppermint tea in hand, thinking, this wasn't the destination, just the first turn in a new direction. But I didn't expect it to lead to a reunion I thought would never happen. My first day at Haven Design began with me arriving 20 minutes early, sitting in my car reapplying lip balm while rereading the orientation email. The elevator took me to the 9th floor, where natural light poured in from every direction and the rhythmic clacking of keyboards felt almost familiar. Claire met me at the front and handed me a temporary badge and a cream-colored paper folder. "Jessica wants you to start by observing," she said briskly. "Don't hesitate to ask questions, but don't interrupt when someone's sketching. They don't like breaking their flow." I nodded, palms already damp again. Jessica was waiting for me in a small meeting room. She gestured toward the desk near the window. "Sit here. This is Devin." The man with brown hair and one earbud turned to me and gave a small nod. "Hey, he's working on a branding layout. Watch him take notes on his process." That's all for now. I sat down and pulled my notebook from my canvas bag. Devin didn't say anything else, but he opened Illustrator and started working, muttering quietly as he went. I watched how he dragged the grids, adjusted the space between text and icons, and named every layer in organized groups. Unlike working alone at home, everything here had clear intent. Why that color? Why that font? Why the button sits on the right? I filled nearly a full page by lunchtime. I followed the team down to the pantry around noon. Some poured coffee, others reheated their lunches. A woman with shoulder-length curls and a pale blue shirt struck up a conversation. Sadie, right? The new intern? Yep. I'm Morgan. Welcome. Learn anything useful yet? Quite a bit, I smiled, still trying to remember everyone's name. She laughed and handed me an oatmeal cookie from the shared tray. Go ahead. Unspoken rule, shared snacks belong to everyone. I bit into the cookie and looked around the cozy room where people chatted and doodled on napkins. It wasn't formal, but there was a quiet kind of discipline. No signs, no yelling bosses, yet everyone stayed focused. That afternoon, Jessica called me into her office. How's observation going? Good. I've taken a lot of notes. She nodded and slid an iPad toward me. This is a wireframe for an upcoming pitch. Try suggesting a color palette and typography. I blinked. For the whole project? It's just a test. You don't have to be right. You just need a reason for your choices. Submit it by the end of the week. I took the iPad back to my desk, a mix of nerves and anticipation bubbling inside. When I opened the file, the layout was clean, simple, but blank in a way that felt like it was waiting for someone to give it a soul. I opened my notebook and jotted down my first ideas. Earthy tones, soft serif fonts, generous white space, then crossed them out and tried again. 3 hours later, I still hadn't landed on a final palette, but I could tell you exactly why I had rejected the other ones. By the time I left the office, it was completely dark. Outside, the wind picked up, and snowflakes started drifting down. I wrapped my scarf tightly and stepped quickly across the sanded sidewalk. At home, I sank into my small sofa, turned on the warm yellow lamp, and poured a glass of warm water. I was about to put on music when my phone buzzed. Mom was calling. I let it ring a few times before picking up. Sadie, it's Mom, she said, her voice unreadable. Either pleased or worried. Yeah, I heard you're interning at Grant's company. I closed my eyes. Yeah, I started this week. There was a brief pause. Then she said, I thought you were still working at the pizza shop. Not anymore. I left to focus on this. Did Grant say anything to you? Oh, he just told me about the opportunity. The rest I handled myself. She didn't respond. A quiet sigh escaped her. Then she said, well, that's surprising. But congratulations. I wasn't sure how much of that was genuine, but at least she didn't stop me. I hung up, set the phone down, and leaned my head back on the couch. The air in the room seemed a little softer. I didn't tell her that I had met with Uncle Grant 3 days ago, in a conversation that still lingered in my mind every time I opened my laptop, because what he said then made me see my entire childhood from a completely different angle. And I hadn't expected that new angle to rattle me more than any color palette ever had. 3 days after that phone call with Mom, Jessica asked me to meet in a small room near the pantry. She sat upright, mock-up of my public health platform design in hand, my color and font suggestions. Sadie, she said bluntly, this palette, a bit too soft for a healthcare context, but your logic tracks. Good spacing choices, you've got an independent eye. I didn't know if that was praise or critique, but then she gave a short nod. We'd like you to assist the branding team on a client project based in Austin. You'll work with Morgan. I looked up. Morgan, the curly-haired woman who gave me the oatmeal cookie, smiled gently from the chair beside me. We're rolling out a series of social visuals over 2 weeks, she said. I need someone with strong layout instincts and the patience to revise. I didn't say yes right away. I just pressed my lips together and gave a small nod. Not from hesitation, but because I was trying not to let my voice crack from excitement. After the meeting, I returned to my desk and opened the client's brand guidelines. Their primary palette leaned teal, fresh, not too clinical, but still trustworthy. I started creating a series of thumbnails, tweaking borders, adjusting every CTA button. Morgan came by and tapped the desk edge lightly. Looks solid, she said, but your headline still feels a little lost. Try something more eye-catching. Adjusted, then adjusted again. By the time I looked at the clock, it was past 7. I called Zoe on my drive home, the speaker on. "So they actually put you on a real project?" she asked, voice rising through the car speakers. "Yep, and I'm trying really hard not to overthink the part where I could mess it all up. Don't mess anything up, just do your part. You're good at this." I smiled and ended the call as I reached my apartment building. The elevator was still broken. I climbed 4 flights of stairs, turned on the small heater by the wall, and pulled the comforter from the chair to wrap around myself. My laptop was still open on the table, Figma glowing softly. I sat down and kept working on the layout, not because anyone told me to, not because of a looming deadline, just because I wanted the final version to carry something that was mine. The next day at lunch break, I walked around the complex. The wind was strong, blowing flyers against my heels. As I kicked them off, my phone buzzed. Dad's number. I stood still, warm coffee cup in hand. "Sadie," he said, voice low. "How are you?" I swallowed. "I'm okay." "I heard from your mom that you're working at Grant's firm." I sat on a nearby stone bench. "Yeah. Are you comfortable working there?" I closed my eyes. "What do you mean?" "Grant and we haven't really resolved things. I just worry you might get pulled into it." I stared straight ahead. "I'm not getting pulled into anything. I'm there because I want to challenge myself." He didn't interfere. He just opened the door. Walking through it was my choice. A long pause followed. "Yeah," he finally said. "It's just strange to think of you working with him, especially given the past." "You never told me about the past," I cut in, still calm. "Just said, don't worry about it." He said nothing. I exhaled, eyes on the steam rising from my cup. But you know what? Maybe I needed to hear it, to understand more. About you, and about him. His voice dropped. "That's for another time. Right now, I just want you to know, even if I don't agree with everything, I still hope you get to do what you want." I didn't know what to say, so I just replied, "Thank you." Back at the office, Morgan was waiting at the elevator. "Jessica asked if you could present the initial visual concept tomorrow afternoon," she said. I blinked. "Me? Yeah. Being support doesn't mean hiding forever. You ready?" I didn't answer right away. I just stepped into the elevator, heartbeat steady but strong, thinking, if ever there was a time to stand up, it's now. And maybe that presentation wouldn't just be my first real test in design. It might be the first time I stood before my family with something they couldn't dismiss. The meeting happened in a small, glass-walled conference room overlooking the city, where snow-covered branches swayed gently in the wind. I stood beside Morgan, iPad in hand. Across from us were 3 client reps and Jessica, who watched with her usual unreadable expression. "Good afternoon," Morgan began confidently. "Today, Sadie will present the visual direction for your social campaign. She developed the color scheme and tone based on last week's creative brief." I gave a small nod. My hands holding the iPad suddenly felt heavier, but my throat wasn't as dry as I'd feared. I spoke, not too fast, not too timidly, about how the silver-blue palette paired with clean sans-serif fonts could convey approachability without sacrificing professionalism. I explained the layout choices for mobile readability and why using real photos instead of stock would earn more trust. One of the clients nodded during slide 5. "I like this approach. It feels warm, but credible." Morgan glanced at me, her smile subtle. Jessica simply crossed her arms, tilting her head, the kind of look you couldn't read until later. The meeting ended in 30 minutes. As people began to leave, Jessica said quietly, "Stay a minute." Once the room was empty, she looked at me. "You handled the presentation well," she said. "Clear, no fluff, but next time, let someone else control the slides. You kept looking down at the iPad, broke eye contact." I nodded, swallowing a hint of disappointment. "Thank you. I'll work on that." She studied me for a moment. Not everyone new has the guts to stand in that room. especially not with that kind of composure. I didn't respond, just gave a quiet smile as I packed up. My hands were still trembling slightly, but I knew I'd crossed a line between the me now and the me from 3 months ago. That afternoon, I got an email from finance. My first intern paycheck had landed. It wasn't a lot, but enough for me to step away from my weekend cafe shifts. I called Zoe as I left work. "You actually quit?" she asked over the sound of a smoothie blender in the background. "Not entirely. I told my manager I could help out if they're short, but I want to spend weekends studying UI and updating my portfolio." "Sounds like you're finally living your own life." I laughed, setting the phone on the windowsill. Outside, melting snow dripped steadily onto the railing. I sat down, pulled up the morning's design file. I wanted to keep working, not out of fear of messing up, but because I genuinely wanted it to be better. That night, while tweaking the layout of the third concept, my phone rang. "Mom." I stared at the screen before picking up. "Sadie, your dad's having a bit of trouble," she said quickly. "The company downsized. He just lost his manager role." I listened to the soft ticking of the wall clock. I don't know what to say. "You don't need to say anything. I just thought you should know. And Ethan, your brother, he's having some financial issues. He asked me for a loan. You want me to help?" I cut in. "No, not exactly. I just thought if you could maybe front a little something to—" I gripped the phone tightly. "Mom, I'm still an intern. I still owe tuition. I can't keep being the one who patches everything that's broken." "I know," she hesitated. "But Ethan, Ethan's a grown man too. If you've ever been silenced because you weren't believed or blamed just for telling the truth, leave a comment. Share this story if you think someone out there needs to hear it. Being kind doesn't mean sacrificing yourself." After that call, I stepped outside onto the tiny balcony. The cold air turned my nose red, but my mind felt strangely clear. I knew then, if I were ever to help someone again, it would be on my own terms. The next morning, Uncle Grant dropped by the office. No warning. He simply handed me a cappuccino and said, "Jessica told me you handled the meeting really well." I took the cup, fingers brushing the paper lid. I still have a lot to learn. "And you're learning," he said, then paused. "By the way, would you have dinner with me tomorrow evening? There are some things about the family I think you should know." I didn't answer right away, but something stirred inside me, like an old layer of dust had just been touched. And I started to realize what I hadn't been told might change the way I saw everything. We met at a small Italian restaurant just outside the Arts District. Warm yellow lights, checkered tablecloths, and the scent of garlic in the air. I arrived a few minutes early and chose a window seat. When Uncle Grant walked in, I noticed he carried the same presence as always. A dark coat, shoes that weren't polished but were clean, and eyes that weren't too soft but never cold. We ordered simple dishes, pasta and salad. He poured water into my glass like he'd done it 100 times. "Work going okay?" he asked as the waiter stepped away. I nodded. "Some days are better than others, but overall, I feel like I'm in the right place. And for the right reasons," he added. "You're succeeding, not because someone's pulling strings." I wasn't sure if he meant to lead into something else, so I just lowered my gaze and twisted the napkin between my fingers. "Do you think," he said, "your dad was ever like you?" I looked up. Back then, he was the one who carried the weight, just like you now. The only difference is he wasn't recognized. I was. Mostly thanks to luck. I didn't respond. Something inside me went still, like a stone just sank to the bottom of a lake. "We started the business together," he continued. "The idea was both of ours, the work was split, but when it came time to raise capital, your dad wanted to move fast. So fast he cut corners. I disagreed, and that broke something between us." "Hem said you betrayed him," I said slowly, eyes fixed on the lemon slice drifting in my glass. "That's true. I bought out his shares when he couldn't raise funds to stay in. It was a hard call, and I lost plenty of sleep after." Uncle Grant set down his fork, laced his fingers. "But I never stopped thinking of him as a brother. Sometimes pride is stronger than blood. So, what about me? I asked. When they used my college savings for Ethan, did you know? He nodded. I did. I went to see them. Offered to restore your fund, but your dad refused. Said, this family doesn't take handouts from traitors. I leaned back. All the fragmented thoughts I'd carried for years seemed to rearrange, not into a clear picture, but a new map with paths I'd never seen before. Should I be angry at him? I asked almost without thinking. I don't think so, Grant replied. I think you should understand him, and then decide how you want to live from there. We were quiet for a long time. When the main course came, I ate almost automatically. When we parted, Uncle Grant didn't say anything more. He just placed a hand gently on my shoulder before leaving. That night, I sat at my laptop, opened my email, and closed it. Then opened an old file, the budget spreadsheet I'd made last year to juggle both jobs. A note in the margin, written faintly in pencil, if I get the fall scholarship. I stared at that line for a long time, then shut the laptop and drew the curtain closed. 3 days later, I had dinner at Mom's house, the first time in months. Ethan was there, still wearing a hoodie, holding a soda can, talking about his next startup idea. Dad sat silently at the head of the table, poking at his salad like his mind was elsewhere. When Mom asked how work was, I answered briefly, it's good. So, Uncle Grant's helping you a lot, huh? Ethan chimed in. I looked up. He opened a door. I have to do the work. Ethan shrugged. Still, having someone in the industry is nice. I set down my fork. You know, some people are handed opportunities and still burn through their parents' money without taking responsibility. Ethan flushed. I'm trying to build something meaningful. But who pays the bills every time you fail? I looked straight at Dad. Let me ask you this. If I came to you asking for $5,000 to start a business, would you say yes? No one answered. Only the hum of the heater filled the space. I worked 2 jobs, slept 4 hours a night. No one asked if I was okay. Meanwhile, Ethan's had 3 startup ideas, and there's always someone pulling strings for him. Mom lowered her gaze. Dad's hands tightened around his utensils, eyes drifting elsewhere. I don't need recognition, I said. I just want the truth acknowledged. No one interrupted me. No one left the table. But the silence in that kitchen was heavier than any argument. I stood up, folded my napkin neatly. I'm heading out, dinner's over. And as I walked out the door, no one stopped me. I wasn't angry, but I was done letting anyone take away my voice. Because some wounds only begin to heal once they're spoken aloud, even if no one wants to hear them. And maybe the most surprising part was still waiting just around the corner. 2 days after that quiet dinner, Mom called me around 9 p.m., a time she normally would never bother me. Her voice was soft, but not indirect like usual. There's something I think you should hear from me. I sat down on the couch, pulled a blanket over my legs. A mug of chamomile tea steamed on the table. What is it? I know you're angry about a lot, and I don't blame you, but there's something I've kept from you for too long. She paused. Back when you were a senior in high school, applying to colleges, Grant came to your father. I didn't say anything. Outside the window, snow was falling lightly. I could hear each flake tapping gently against the glass. Him knew we used your college fund to invest in Ethan. He offered to support you financially, not give, but sponsor you in name so you wouldn't need to borrow too much. Your father refused. My chest tightened, not exactly from anger, but something deeper, the weight of being overlooked by both sides. And you didn't object? I asked, trying to keep my voice even. I didn't say anything. I thought if I took your side, everything at home would explode. She paused, then added, but I've felt wrong about that ever since. I leaned my head against the chair. Above me, the standing lamp cast a warm yellow glow. There was nothing left to ask, but I couldn't end the call. I'm sorry, Sadie. I don't know when or if you'll ever forgive me. Maybe never. But you need to know. What you've done is extraordinary. Not because you're gifted, but because you didn't quit, even when no one stood by you. I clutched the edge of the blanket. Something stung behind my eyes, but I shut them, letting it pass like a strong gust of wind. Thanks for telling me, I said. That was all. After the call, I stepped out onto the balcony and watched the trees tremble beneath the snow. Everything around me was cold, but not cutting like in years past. The next morning, I arrived at the office earlier than usual. Morgan had her headphones in, and Jessica was taping a new mood board to the glass in the conference room. I put my things down, then headed to Grant's office downstairs. The door was slightly ajar. I knocked gently. "May I come in?" He looked up and nodded. "Something on your mind?" I sat down, hands neatly folded on my lap. "I just found out about what happened during my senior year, that you tried to help." He set his pen down. "Your mother told you?" I nodded. "I thought you should know that I know." He looked at me, expression calm, but something settled behind his eyes. "I wanted to tell you, but if I had crossed that line then, it might have made the fracture worse." "I understand," I said, "and I'm not angry at you. I just wish someone had chosen me over their pride. Maybe things would have been different." "Maybe," he replied gently. "Or maybe because things weren't easy, you've become the person you are." I exhaled. "I don't deny that. I just don't want others to go through the same thing." He nodded. "So, are you ready?" I tilted my head. "Ready for what?" "To not just design beautifully, but lead a team toward real solutions. There's a new project. State level, they're looking for a full rebranding campaign." My eyes widened. "Me?" "You'll be co-lead with Morgan, if you agree." I looked down at my hands. My palms were warming, not from the room's temperature, but from a quiet resolve spreading through me, like the last click of a puzzle piece finding its place in a picture I thought would never come together. "I accept." That night, I sat by the window with a stack of blank paper and began sketching. Not logos, not fonts, but a handwritten letter to the 17-year-old me. No one else would read it. But every line loosened something old, questions that never had answers, dreams that had been paused. And maybe, in that silent night, I finally took the first step, not just away from the past, but into a future I chose on my own. I didn't know if the new path would be smooth, but I was sure the person moving forward was no longer the girl who only endured. And that path began the moment someone came back asking for my help again. I was in the middle of a brainstorm with Morgan and the content team when my phone buzzed in my coat pocket. A message from Mom. Just a few words. "Ethan's in trouble. Can you call?" I shoved the phone back, trying to focus on the meeting, but my mind drifted. My pen moved, but my eyes locked on a fixed point on the screen. After we wrapped, I walked outside and called back. Mom picked up immediately, voice tense. "Ethan lost a major contract. He's behind on credit cards, office rent, even payroll. Your father and I have done all we can, but now—" I cut in. "What do you want me to do?" She paused. "Just, if you could front around 5,000 for now. He'll pay you back once things stabilize." I watched the traffic rush below. Everything moved fast down there, but in my head, each word repeated slowly. "You know, I've only just started to feel stable," she continued, "but if you help now, you might save Ethan from personal bankruptcy." I leaned on the railing, fingers touching the cold stone edge. "I just took on a new project. I don't have real savings yet. If I give that amount, I'll have to delay several other plans." "I'm being honest with you, Mom." "So, you can't help?" I inhaled. "I can help, but not the old way." That evening, I drafted an email, sent to Dad, Mom, and Ethan. Subject: Terms of Support and Family Financial Principles. The message was short and clear. I'm willing to loan Ethan $5,000, split into 2 installments over the next 3 months. The loan must be signed in writing, with a specific repayment schedule. While receiving support, Ethan cannot invest in any new business ideas unless he has a stable income. I will not be held responsible if his plans fall through again. The email went out at 11:47 p.m. The next morning, Ethan called. I picked up while standing by the apartment window, the city still half asleep. "You're serious?" he asked, his voice dry. "Yeah. You mean you'll only help if I agree to be controlled?" "No, I mean, I'll help if you agree to be accountable." Ethan was silent. I heard a faint clink, maybe something hitting the table on his end. "I'm not used to that," he said. "Maybe it's time you got used to it. Why are you making this so hard on me?" I let out a faint laugh. "Have you ever asked what's been hard for me?" No answer. Just a long exhale. Then he hung up. I didn't know whether he'd agree to the terms, but I knew this time I wouldn't be pulled in as the default solution anymore. That night, I met Morgan at a small bar near the train station. She'd just heard about my promotion to co-lead and dragged me out for what she called designer, poor style, celebrating, shared fries and gin and tonic. "I always knew you had something different," she said, her arm resting over the back of her chair. "Not just because you're good, because you don't act like anyone owes you an opportunity." I looked at her, a soft smile tugging at my lips. Honestly, I used to think I had to be grateful for everything, even the unfair stuff. And now? Now, I think, gratitude should be selective. Just because someone gives you a chance doesn't mean they get to own you. She nodded. "Welcome to adulthood." We clinked glasses. Outside, the snow was starting to fall again, light but steady. 3 days later, I got a reply from Ethan, short and to the point. "I agree to the terms. Just got a part-time job at an agency starting next week." I read it again, then again. Didn't completely believe it, but maybe I didn't need to. I just felt lighter, because at least one person in my family, someone who always assumed others would carry the weight, was finally trying to walk on his own. When I told Uncle Grant, he nodded, took a sip of coffee, and said, "Sometimes the best way to help someone isn't to pull them up, it's to stop laying out the cushion underneath." I nodded. On my desk was the contract for the state-level project, with my name listed next to the title of co-lead designer. And just as I was about to sign, another email came in, this one from Dad. No subject. The first line read only 3 words. Sunday night, I stared at the screen, paused for a moment, then opened my calendar. I figured maybe someone was finally choosing to have a real conversation, rather than just waiting for me to fall silent, like always. Sunday night, I arrived at my parents' house on time, neither early nor late. The rain had just stopped and the stone porch was still damp. I rang the bell and it was Dad who opened the door. No hug, no handshake, just a small nod as he stepped aside for me to enter. The air inside was familiar, but felt less heavy, less expectant. Mom was already seated at the dining table. Next to her was Ethan, his wrists still wrapped, but his face looked more alert than it had in weeks. On the table were corn chowder, a loaf of buttered toast, and 4 neatly set plates. "Would you like something to drink?" Mom asked, her tone neutral. "Anything's fine," I replied, hanging my coat. No one said much during the meal. I sat between Mom and Ethan, chewing the crusty bread slowly. Everyone kept their own pace like they'd rehearsed it. When the table was left with just soup residue and a half-open bottle of wine, Dad stood and gestured toward the living room. "Let's talk over here." I followed. He took the armchair, I picked the far end of the couch, separated by a low table. Mom poured tea and slid a cup toward me. "We've been thinking," Dad said, "about a lot, about how this family runs." I didn't speak, just laced my fingers and rested them in my lap. "Ethan's moving into a rental apartment next month," Mom added. "Your father and we don't have the energy to keep holding everything together anymore. And maybe we shouldn't." Ethan stayed silent. I glanced at him. His eyes were lowered, but not evasive. Dad looked at me, his voice calm. "What we did with Grandma and Grandpa's trust, It was wrong not to ask you, even worse to assume you'd sacrifice. It wasn't what I used to hope I'd hear, but it carried a tone I hadn't heard before, something honest. I nodded as a way to acknowledge, not forgive, but recognize the shift. You're not the one responsible for everyone's mistakes, Mom said, meeting my eyes. And I'm not the only one who knows how to figure things out, I added quietly. We've all grown up. A few weeks later, Morgan and I began developing the new design campaign for the city project. The name Shifted Ground, focused on telling stories of internal healing and recovery. Morgan messaged me, "Every concept needs emotional roots. Ready to bring yours in?" I sat in the studio staring at the mood board covered in images, women holding torn umbrellas, worn-out shoes, ripped maps, and handwritten letters. I opened my laptop, placed my fingers on the keys. "Where are you planning to start?" Morgan asked. I typed the first lines. I once stood between two jobs and a torn umbrella, but what I learned wasn't about patching it up. It was realizing I deserved a new one. Morgan smiled. "So, you're choosing to tell it your way. Not for pity, but so someone might see themselves in it." A month later, I received an invitation from Ethan. Slate blue card, cursive lettering. Grand opening, photography studio in Greenpoint, Brooklyn. Grand logo and maple. He opened a small space, using the first installment he repaid from the loan I gave him. I wasn't planning to go, partly due to work, partly because I wasn't ready. But that morning, I boarded the train, carrying the old camera Dad gave me when I was 16. Ethan looked surprised to see me at the door. He smiled. A real one, no armor behind it. "Want to take the first shot?" he offered, handing me the camera. "No," I shook my head, then handed him mine. "You take it. For me." Like a marker in time. He took it. "Where should you stand?" I stepped into a corner where the light cut in gently. Holding a warm cup of coffee, I turned to face my brother. "Right here. And leave it just like this." But I don't know where you're listening from, maybe in your car, right before bed, or during a day when you just needed a story to remind you to stand up. Let me know where you're tuning in from. And if you'd like to hear more real journeys like this one, don't forget to follow the channel because the next story might be the one you need. Sadie's story isn't just about escaping injustice within a family. It's a reminder that sometimes healing means stepping out of the roles we've outgrown, even when that role is the one who always endures. In real life, so many people live in relationships where silence is treated as duty. But like Sadie, setting boundaries, reclaiming your voice, and living the life you choose is the bravest thing you can do. Not to fight others, but to finally protect yourself.